Welcome back to the podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Miller. Every week, I chat with fascinating people from all walks of life in order to bring you knowledge, inspiration, and insight. If you enjoy the show, you can support it by subscribing, leaving a review, and sharing it with a friend. This is the Jeremy Miller Podcast. All right, dude, I'm super excited. How you feeling?
Good, man. It's finally warming up here, so that makes me happy.
Yeah, dude, I'm from Casper, Wyoming originally, and I don't know if you spend much time there, but they got a record amount of snow, like within a single calendar day. Like last week, I think it was like 3 feet. I mean, did you guys got probably part of the same storm? I'm sure, right?
Yep. Yeah, it was. Our grass was starting to show green, and then it basically was half the size of my fence, which is a 6-foot fence. So yeah, we got about 3 feet too.
That's nuts. Mike McKnight, the low-carb runner. Welcome to the podcast, dude. I'm super happy to have you here.
Thanks for having me, Jeremy. Appreciate it. Man,
so I got to start this off by saying, one, you are just an absolute badass. Like all the stuff that you've been doing, like I've really only been following you recently, and the stuff that I've seen you do, and going on your website and seeing all these amazing accomplishments you've done, it's just so impressive. And as far as I know, you're like right at the top as far as ultra and endurance athletes. So just got to start off by saying kudos to everything you've done.
Well, thank you. I don't know if I agree that I'm at the top, but thank you.
I want to dive into like your origins and what got you into doing all these quote unquote crazy endurance events, because there's not many people out there that are willing to do them and do them as well as you. So like, just take me all the way back to where you first got into running, and then we can kind of go from there.
Yeah. I mean, my introduction isn't typical. I grew up on a dairy farm. I was overweight. I had a lot of trauma in my past, which is why I gained some weight. And then I just was never really physically active. And then when I turned 16, I started running just to lose weight. Once I lost the weight, I stopped running just because I associated running with losing weight. It wasn't something to be enjoyed. It was something I had to do because I let myself go, basically. So I stopped running basically all the way until I was about 21 years old when I first started going to college. And then I just decided I want to get back in shape. I didn't gain my weight back, but I still wasn't really in shape, in my opinion. Yeah, I mean, you can look good and not be in shape. Yep. And so I just started to start running again. And to make a very long story short, when I like really started to appreciate it, just when I really started to, like I had a goal to walk onto the track team at the college I was going to. Like just when all that started to happen, I ended up breaking my back in a skiing accident. And this was about 2012. Yeah, February of 2012. And so I shattered my L1 vertebrae, was almost paralyzed. I had to go get emergency surgery where they put in, it was 2 rods and 9 screws, which is still in my spine today. But my first question to my doctor was when I could start running again, just because I started getting into it at that point. And he essentially told me that I needed to like not drop out of college, but I always forget what the term's called. Incomplete your classes, I think. Yeah. Where basically I deferred them for a full year until I was better. So he told me to incomplete my classes for a year. I lost my job. He told me I should move in with my parents so they could take care of me and all this stuff. Like I had a walker. I had those braces for my torso that's like designed specifically for my torso. Like they like put this plastic around me and poured some like plastic. I don't know what it is, but it basically formed to my body. So it was exactly to how like the shape of my body. He told me not to run for about a year. But long story short, I started running again about 3 weeks after my surgery.
3 weeks.
3 weeks. I ended up signing up for a charity 10K, which was about 6 weeks post-surgery. I ran that 10K with my brace on and everything.
Oh my gosh. Do you have any photos of that? I want to see pictures of that.
I have pictures of the brace, but not of me running in it. I wish I did. I kicked myself in the butt for not documenting that.
Dude, holy cow. So, wow, you said a lot right there. I feel like we glazed over so much. So you ran in high school or college, or where did you like initially start running? Just kind of, was it competitively or just for fun?
So I ran in high school to lose weight, and then I started running in
Right.
college
Okay,
to get
okay.
in shape. And then I probably started training for like a month, like intense training for about a month and a half to like get myself ready to walk onto the track team that spring.
Okay.
So it was about probably like 8 months. I was like actually training hard and trying to become a better runner before I broke my back. Basically, my physical therapy, he told me just to walk a mile a day. And where I grew up, where my parents were like, or where my parents are still, it's this small farming town, like hardly anybody out there. So I would just go walk on this road up to the cemetery where my parents lived and back. And that was exactly a mile.
Was this in Utah?
Yeah, northern Utah,
Okay.
basically Idaho. My parents are like a mile from the Idaho border.
Okay.
So yeah, I started doing that every day. And just like within that first week, so my first mile walk after breaking my back took me like an hour and a half. It was just like weird. Like my back felt weird and like my legs were kind of cramped up and stuff. So it was very slow. And so like that first week, I just kept setting these goals to like get faster at that mile walk. So at the end of that first week, I shaved it down from like an hour and a half to like 45 minutes or 40 minutes or something.
Jeez.
Middle of the second week, I got it down to about 20 minutes. And then I ended up ditching the walker and just started doing it with like a cane. And so for that second week, I started using the cane, but I also started increasing my mileage. So, I did 2 miles one day, then 3 miles one day. And by the end of that second week, I was walking 6 miles. And again, mind you, like I didn't have school. My friends were in school. I didn't have a job, so I had nothing to do. So I had all the time in the world to just go walk if I wanted to.
What did the doctor say when did you just show up one day and be like, yeah, I've been walking miles and miles, even though I couldn't even walk a mile?
I've never told him.
I'd be curious what his reaction would be.
I know he's still a surgeon here. Like I still live where it happened. So like every podcast I do where people ask me about my back, like I always say I need to go talk to him and tell him how good of a job he did, but then I just forget about it.
That's incredible. So go ahead.
I was basically, 6 miles walking with a cane, without a cane, like I ditched the cane. And then I was just like, you know what, I'm going to try running, see what happens. So I went out and ran half a mile and like, it didn't hurt any worse. It felt weird. Like it probably took me like 10 to 20 minutes to do that half mile because I was going super slow and conservative, but I mean, it didn't hurt. So I just started running more and more and ran every day after that. And 3 weeks after that is when I did that 10K.
Was that 10K? Is that your first official race you ever did?
Yep.
Wow, dude, that's. I didn't know any of that. Okay.
Sorry, I did do a half marathon before that.
Okay, man, how did the 10K go? Was it? I'm sure that was very emotional to like probably go from less than a month later. You think, wow, I might not ever be able to walk again, or it's going to take me a year before I can run again, and now you're running a 6.2 mile race.
Yeah, it was emotional. Like, I mean, everybody was telling me not to do it, especially my parents, like rightfully so. But I mean, honestly, the hardest part was I had that stupid brace on. And like, if you want to try running a 10K, but like having your chest constricted to like, I could hardly breathe just because there was no give in that thing. So, I mean, honestly, the hardest part was just like trying to breathe. But I remember I did it in 48 minutes, which is nothing to write home about. But 6 weeks after breaking my back, I think it was like an 8:30 pace.
That's respectable, man. Very respectable.
Yeah, I was happy with it. But yeah, it was totally an emotional moment. And like, I remember the shirt I was wearing. I remember the shorts I was wearing. I remember so much about that day. It was a pretty happy day for me.
Have you always had that mindset of, I don't even know what you would want to call that particular mindset of like saying no to the doctors, no to your friends and your family, all telling you, no, you don't need to run, you shouldn't run, but you're just going to do it anyways. Have you always had that mindset, or did that spark from that event?
It sparked from that. So when I was in high school, I didn't mention this, but I did do track and football. I did football because like I wanted to be cool. Like, growing up overweight, I didn't have a lot of friends. And so like, I lost the weight and like I wanted to make friends. And logically in my naive high school mind, the best way to do that was to join the football team. And then a requirement for football was track. But like, I remember like, I avoided all the big kids at practice at football. I faked so many injuries to get out of football practice. Like, I just wanted the status symbol of being on the football team. I didn't care to actually push myself. So somewhere between like my high school 18-year-old self to, when I turned 21 or 22, whenever it was, I broke my back, something switched in my head. I don't know why, but something did.
Man. So after that first 10K, what'd you do after that? Did you just kind of continually progress through races from there?
Yeah. So, I mean, honestly, when people ask what got me into ultra running, I say it's from breaking my back because, at that point, I finally ditched the brace. My friends called it my Ninja Turtle shell. So I ditched the shell. All my friends were in college. All my friends had jobs. I had no job. I had no classes. And so so I moved back to like my dorm from my parents' house shortly after that 10K. And just because like all my friends were busy from like 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. or whatever, like I would sleep in till noon or something every day. And then I'd wake up and I'd go run 10 to 20 miles every day. And then after that, I'd go to the gym and lift weights for 2 hours. Like that's probably like the most in shape I've ever been in was during that time. But yeah, like just simply because I had nothing else to do, I just started running a lot. Through that, I ended up getting a new job where I met a ultra runner, and he was the first ultra runner I've ever met. Like I didn't even know what ultra running was at the time. And so when he found out I was like running 10 to 20 miles a day just for fun, he told me about ultra running. He told me about a local race that he encouraged me to sign up for, which I did. So I basically just did one 10K, one half marathon, and then I jumped right into ultras. Like I still technically haven't even done a marathon.
Just skipped right by it. I love it. Yeah. So it sounds like you were just, I guess, for lack of a better term, just kind of lost for a little bit. Like did you feel like you didn't have a purpose or you're just kind of searching for meaning or purpose? Because I feel like, when something very significant and traumatic happens like that for a lot of people and all your friends are doing this other thing and, you're just kind of hanging out. You're just sort of lost, I guess. Is that a good description?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so like every night, like I'd go to bed at like 2 p.m. And I just remember it's kind of pathetic. Oh, I don't want to say it's pathetic in case people are going through something similar, but I would just lay in my bed for like 3 to 4 hours at night till 3 or 4 in the morning and just like listen to sad music. Like, even though I healed remarkably fast, even though I wasn't paralyzed, like just the fact that I was like not in college, not a part of like the festivities or whatever term you want to use, I was a little bit lost, you could say. So yeah, I'd say though running was definitely the highlight for that time period. It was like literally the only thing I was looking forward to each day.
Man, well, it sounds like running was sort of that savior in that moment, or just fitness and, pursuing, I guess, a better version of yourself in that physical regard.
Yeah, absolutely.
Man, so what was who was the guy that you met, the ultra runner?
His name's Cody Draper. He's actually now the race director of a local 100 that's pretty prestigious. It's the Bear 100.
I've heard of that one. Okay.
Yeah, so it's just here in my backyard. It's a hard rock qualifier. It's a Western States qualifier. But yeah, he's still a trail runner. He's a race director. He's pretty well known in the area for his running.
What was the first ultra that you signed up for?
So, I mean, for all the hardcore ultra runners that are listening, they might not think that it's an ultra, but it's the Logan Peak race. And it's just a 28 miler, so it's barely over a marathon. But you go up to one of our higher peaks here in Cache Valley, Utah. You gain like 7,000 feet in those 28 miles. So it's definitely a lot of climbing. My longest run before that race was like 20 miles. And I just remember like absolutely suffering on that 20-mile run and being pretty nervous for it.
How'd that first ultra go as a whole? Was that just a whole new stepping stone into like, wow, I might get addicted to this thing?
Yeah. So, I mean, the good news for me is this was back when it wasn't as hot as it is today. So I did this race and I ended up taking 4th place. I beat my goal by over an hour. So it did go pretty well. But just the fact that like, there's not like the time that I did it in at that time would not get me 4th place today. But just because not many people were into it back then, it gave me the confidence that I needed to be like maybe I could get good at this. So, yeah, I definitely decided to stick with it after having such a good first experience.
What year did that happen?
2013. So ironically, this was about 2 to 3 months a year and 2 to 3 months post surgery. So that was roughly right when I was supposed to start running again, according to what my doctor told me.
And you're just running up a mountain in Utah, running 28 miles.
Yeah.
That's incredible, man. That's just such an insane journey to go from literally not going to be able to run for a year to crushing an ultramarathon within basically a year.
Yeah. I was happy.
So I am curious because I know nutrition is a very large part of you, I guess. And I'm very curious as to what your nutrition looked like, if you remember it from some of those early races or that first ultramarathon.
Oh yeah, I remember it. So do you know who Carl Meltzer is?
Yeah.
The speed goat.
Yep.
So he, for people who are listening that don't know who he is, he's like, he set a speed record on the Appalachian Trail a few years ago. He is, I don't know if this is a real word, but he's dubbed himself like the winningest 100-mile ultramarathoner in the world or whatever, meaning he's just won a lot of 100-mile races. And so he's from Utah. It's probably about an hour and a half from my house. And I remember reading an interview that Trail and Ultrarunner magazine did with him. And they asked him about his nutrition. And his answer was essentially like, I eat whatever the hell I want. Like if I want a beer, I'll drink it. If I want a pizza, I'll eat it. And so when I read
Ultrarunner.
Exactly. And so when I read that, I was just like, yeah, I like that idea. And so I adopted the mentality. It was just like, I'm running this much, I'm working out this much, I just need calories. So like a lot of pizza, a lot of ice cream. Panda Express was my favorite place in the world back in the day. So like, no joke, I went there 4 times a week. So just typical standard American diet was what I was doing when I started running.
It's sad that is considered the standard American diet.
Exactly.
Did it just get to a point where you're like, yeah, this is not going to work out for what I want to do?
Kind of. I had somebody that helped me realize that. So basically, I used to work in the marketing department for Ultra Footwear. And my specific role, I was the sports marketing director, meaning that I was like over events and athletes. Do you know who Jeff Browning is?
Yeah.
So one of our so every year we had a retreat with our athletes where we'd fly them somewhere cool and then spend 4 or 5 days just running and teaching them about the product. And my first retreat with these guys happened to be Zion, Utah. We flew in the team. I had like a huge van. I picked up 6 or 7 athletes, drove them to Zion. But Jeff Browning, he was in that van. This was my first time meeting him, and he was in the front seat with me. And I remember I had it was the White Can Monster. It was my favorite back in the day. I was drinking that and I was talking to Jeff. I had no idea, like, I knew who he was obviously because he was an athlete for the team that I was over, but like, I didn't know much about his diet. And he's definitely one of the pioneers of a low carb approach for endurance athletes. And so I can't remember the comment I made, but I made a comment about how like I have just a lot of stomach issues at my races. And Jeff's response is basically like, well, it's because you drink garbage like that. And I was just like, what do you mean? Isn't this what all the ultra runners eat and drink? So he basically told me about a low carb approach. And at the time with my races, I either was having stomach issues or energy issues because I was eating as much as I needed for the energy that I needed to get to the finish. But it was just like so much for my stomach that it was hard to digest. So I'd either puke or just like dry heave. And then my next race, I would try and like not eating as much so I wouldn't puke, but then I'd end up losing all my energy because I wasn't eating enough. So it was just this dumb cycle that I was stuck in. And the way Jeff explained the low carb approach to me basically made me realize that, you know, assuming what he was saying was true, that it could potentially fix those 2 issues for me because I would be eating less, meaning I would have less GI issues. And then because I'd be training my body to be more efficient at burning fat for fuel, I'd have less energy issues. And so I actually I drove him to the airport at the end of that retreat. I drove home, told my wife, I was like, hey, I know that carbs it's a staple of our diet. We were newlyweds. So, pasta and all that stuff is like the cheapest, most affordable thing for us. But I was just like, I really want to get good at this. And I think this can help me. So I'm going to start eating more meat and just basically eat meat and vegetables and see what happens. And That was 6 years ago. Next week, I started the day that my son was born. And next week is his 6-year-old birthday. So it's easy to remember how long I've been doing it. But, I've seen a lot of huge benefits from it ever since.
And I saw you were posting about it a couple of weeks ago. You actually wanted to, correct me if I'm wrong, but you wanted to like revert back to that original diet that you had just to see how your body would react. Is that right?
Yeah. Me and my friend have a podcast where we talk about nutrition, basically, like we call it the Primal Show or the Primal Podcast or something. But we had some continuous blood glucose monitors sent to us just to like see what our food does to our blood glucose, our blood sugar levels. And so we decided just for fun to try the standard American diet for a week to see what happens. And neither one of us lasted more than a day. Like it didn't take long for us to see how bad we felt.
What kind of things were you guys eating?
I mean, I just went back to what I was doing before this. So I had Panda Express for dinner one night. I had a bowl of cereal before going to bed. The day of my long run, I would always start my long runs with a donut back like before I switched. So I had a donut before my long run. Like I had a lot of people who I call them hate followers, people that I think follow me that like don't like me, but they just want to see in their mind what kind of garbage I'm putting out there about nutrition. And so I had a lot of people tell me like, well, of course you felt like crap. Like you went to the extreme. And I'm just like, hey, buddy, this is how I used to eat. Like I didn't do anything differently. So yes, it is extreme, but like that's seriously how I used to eat.
Dude, I think that's such a good way to be able to visualize and a tangible way to experience and feel what that food actually does to your body. Because I mean, it reminds me of I think it's kind of a similar thing with alcoholics, unfortunately, where like that becomes your new baseline or your new norm. Like if you're just constantly drinking or constantly eating these crap foods, you just think, oh, this is just how I feel every single day. But when you get rid of all of that and you adopt a very healthy, whole foods based diet, and then you slowly, out of nowhere, you just implement just garbage food like that, you realize, wow, this stuff is just horrible for you.
Yeah. And I don't want to be one-sided. The big reason we did that was to see what would happen to our glucose levels. And to be honest with you, after I ate that Panda Express meal, which was like, I had 3 different meats and they were all breaded, noodles. And then I had like these cream cheese rangoons or something. It's like basically deep fried cream cheese. Even after eating all of those carbs, the breading, the sugars from the sauces, like my glucose before I ate it was like low 90s. And the highest it got was 125. Which is still very, like the range you want to be in is 70 to 150. So I didn't even spike out of the normal range. And so, I mean, honestly, for people that want to eat healthy, that just taught me that like, if you want to have like one off meal a week, like metabolically, you're probably fine. But like, you just got to potentially deal with all the other issues. Like I, not to get too graphic, but I had diarrhea for a few days.
Oh man.
My joints were just so achy on that long run. I've never had achy joints since doing this until that day. Headache, brain fog, just irritability, just like so many other issues that I don't personally care to ever deal with. But if you're willing to deal with that stuff, like metabolically, you're probably fine to like have 1 or 2 cheat meals a week is kind of what I got out of it.
Dang, that's an important lesson to learn. I think it's like anything else. Like if, some people get so worried about if they miss one workout or if they, have one cheat meal a week or whatever, that their whole training, their whole physique, everything's just going to go out the window. But it's more about, the long game and just being consistent with something and occasionally having those off days. But dude, that's incredible that just from those few meals you had within, a 24-hour window, you just felt like crap, which I'm not surprised, but it's just so powerful to be able to see that firsthand.
Yeah. I mean, my buddy that did it, he didn't even get out of his bed the next day. Like I got back from my long run. I was just like, dude, that was the worst run I've had in years. And his response to me was just like, at least you ran.
Do you take any kind of supplements, or are you strictly, well, let me just re-ask this question. What does a day in the life eating look like for you just on any typical day?
Yeah. So, I mean, it fluctuates based off of my volume and like, if I'm doing a speed workout versus just like a super easy run. But basically the gist is the more I'm working out, the more volume I'm putting in, the more carbohydrates I'm going to have. Most of those carbohydrates are in the form of fruits, with some vegetables, raw honey, and raw dairy. Very little processed foods. I do allow myself to have some processed foods once a week, just so my gut's used to that for like race day. I personally choose like healthier processed foods. So, like a bag of, I don't know if you've heard of the brand Siete.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like I'll do Siete chips because they're grain free. They're cooked in avocado oil instead of seed oils. So I do allow that once a week, but I'd say like 90 to 95% of the time, I'll wake up around 6. I'll get my run in. Sometimes I have a strength training session. I'll do that 3 days a week. And then I usually do all that fasted. Not because I'm just like trying to do it fasted. It's just how it works out. And so, but typically I'll get back from all that and it's usually between 10 or 11. And that's usually when I have my first meal. And that meal is usually 5 to 6 scrambled eggs with a little bit of raw cheese in it, some guacamole. Occasionally I'll do some beef liver just because it's packed with nutrients. And then I'll usually top that off with a big bowl of like berries, banana, heavy cream, and some raw honey. And then usually around 2 or 3, I'll have like a big glass of raw milk just to get a bunch of protein and fat. And then I'll have another bowl of fruit. And then usually for dinner, it's 1 pound to 1.5 pounds of some red meat. Usually with either some like egg salad that I'll make on my own or some shrimp, and then another big bowl of fruit. And so it's basically the way I describe it to people it's like carnivore with fruit. Because all my meals are like 100% carnivore aside from that big bowl of fruit that I have afterwards.
Is the purpose of the fruit just for performance purposes?
Yeah.
Have you experimented without the fruit and like gone strictly carnivore?
Yeah, it doesn't work for me.
No.
No, I mean like, because I guess I used to do that. I used to do carnivore and like very strict keto. I used to do very little fruit, mostly vegetables. And then do you know who Paul Saladino is?
Yeah, of course.
So yeah, I heard about him and I saw his whole thing about how he's like carnivore MD 2.0 and he like eats all meat and then fruit. And he talked a lot about like how vegetables can have gut issues for some people. And I did notice that like on the days that I have a lot of vegetables, like for example, I'll go out to my parents every Sunday with my family and we have family dinner. And just because I don't really do potatoes, my mom would like make me a ton of like zucchini or something like that. And I would notice that like on those days, I would be a lot more inflamed and just have like kind of like irritable bowel syndrome almost, but I never correlated it to anything. But once Paul Saladino started talking about all that, or at least once I found out who Paul Saladino was, I just started wondering if like those random gut issues I had was from my vegetables. So I cut out all vegetables, switched to fruit, noticed an immediate difference with my gut health. And why did I bring this up? Oh, I had a metabolic test, not a metabolic test, but like a VO2 max test done about 2 years ago. And you know how like they like track, have you ever had one done?
I have not, no. I've seen them done, but never personally.
Okay. Well, one of the things they measure is like your crossover point from where you go from burning like mostly fats to primarily glucose. And when I did my test, I never had a crossover point. I basically had to tap out before I had that crossover point.
Oh, wow.
And so for me, that kind of taught me that I essentially reversed what my body was capable of doing. So like I went from like not being able to burn fat for fuel, which is why I like bonked at all my races, to like just being really good at burning fat for fuel, but then almost kind of like glucose intolerant is kind of the way that I thought of it. And in my head that like was essentially taking an edge out of my performance. Like I wanted to be able to burn both fuel sources. And so that was also a turning point for me where I did start to implement a little bit more fruit. And I have noticed a big difference since I've been more fruit focused versus vegetable focused.
Yeah, so it probably had more of an effect on like your top end speed and your like explosiveness, I would imagine.
Yeah. Yeah, and just like uphill running too. Like, for the people that I coach that are in flat areas and they're getting ready for like hilly races, I do focus on giving them a little bit more speed workout. Obviously like Stairmaster and other stuff to help them get vert, but I do believe that like there is a correlation between explosiveness from speed to the explosiveness of being able to like get up to a mountain pretty quickly. And so, yeah, I did feel like I wasn't able to go uphill as fast as like a lot of other trail runners were before making that switch.
I think one of the biggest lessons to be learned out of that is that our bodies are just so adaptable to whatever we give them, whatever stimulus we provide to it. It's like it can adapt to anything that we put it through, which is cool. And so I think the best part about that is you can choose what to give your body, what fuel to give it, what kind of training stimulus, and it's just gonna become more efficient and evolve with you over time, which is awesome.
Yeah.
Do you take any kind of supplements or anything? I didn't hear any supplements in there. I'm just curious if you do like protein powder or greens powder, anything like that.
I occasionally do protein powder. Not often. I used to do it every day, but ever since like the Paul Saladino thing, I have been doing like a lot more eggs than liver. And so I haven't needed the protein powder as much. I do take creatine every day. I do take collagen every day just because, once you hit 30, our body stops producing as much. But I do try to get as much of that from bone broth as I can. So like after this podcast, I guess I forgot to mention that when I go up to have like a bowl of fruit after this, I'll probably have a bowl of bone broth too. So I do try to get most of that from that, but sometimes I'll supplement collagen, but just the typical stuff. Like I'll throw in vitamin D. I'm up in Utah, so I don't see the sun that much. Omegas, probiotics, just some of the typical stuff. But yeah, I'd say collagen and creatine are the two constants.
Cool. So it's really mostly just like an insurance or just kind of filling in the gaps where you might be not getting quite as much from a whole foods diet.
Yeah. Yeah, I've done less supplementation ever since implementing liver into my diet.
That makes sense. Yeah, I mean, liver is kind of known to be like nature's multivitamin, right?
Yeah, they say that about eggs too. So where I'm having eggs every day and liver every other day, I feel pretty topped off with my vitamins and minerals.
What kind of eggs do you eat? I'm a huge fan of eggs, but I'm curious as to what eggs you eat.
Like, you mean like how I cook them, or like if I buy pasture raised?
Yeah, do you buy them from a store? Do you guys have chickens? Or if you do buy them from a store, do you look for, like pasture raised, organic, cage free, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, at a minimum, cage free. I try to get pasture raised, but like with egg prices right now, like,
nuts.
Yeah. So right now we're doing like the cage free. You can get like a 24 pack of cage free eggs at Costco for like $6.
Awesome.
But yeah, at a minimum, I try to get cage free.
Cool. Do you track calories, or do you use any kind of macro tracker or any of that? Or is it mostly now? I mean, it sounds like you eat pretty much the same thing day in, day out. So, you've kind of established that routine and just go off of that. Or do you ever get really detailed with tracking?
No, I don't track. I just eat till I'm satiated. And yeah, I do eat the same thing every day. So I have a good idea of what I'm getting.
It seems like, I mean, within the endurance space in general, that's kind of the way to go about everything. Diet, training included, is like, just do what feels good. And you have to put in a certain amount of hours and reps to establish what kind of stimulus your body needs. But is that, as a whole, the approach that you take is just kind of do what feels good and go based more off of feel rather than sticking to strict data?
Yep. Yeah, I don't think it's good to get stuck in the strict like number crunching data type stuff. I do think it's good to keep your body guessing. So I do like to throw in some random stuff occasionally to like throw myself out of my routine or whatever. But yeah, for the most part, like it's easier that way, and it's easier to get into a routine that way. So I like doing that.
Are you one of those crazy people that go out and run without a watch and just
No.
run just for the fun of it?
No, I need my watch.
Dude, I've tried doing that before because I have a few friends that are like, I'll just go out and run for I don't know how long because I didn't track it. And I'm like, I don't know. I love seeing the Strava data. I can't give it up.
Yeah, I need that data too.
When you're doing races or during training, do you incorporate any kind of gels or endurance powders like a Tailwind or electrolytes, anything like that?
Yeah, so I use Martin gels and Spring energy gels. I tend to do Spring just because I like the ingredients, but occasionally, especially like day 2 of a 200 or something like that, you get what I call palate fatigue. And so that's where I revert to Martins because they essentially have no flavor. And then they have like a Jello-like consistency. So like they go down the throat super easy. And just because they have no taste, like it's usually better for my stomach. So I switch between those two. I use Mountain Ops. I also use Redmond Relight for my electrolytes, and as well as Ultra Salt. And then I do like a lot of. Do you have like a Natural Grocers where you're at? I'm sure you have a Whole Foods. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll go to old Natural Grocers, and like a lot of my races are fueled by just products out of there. Like I get this grain-free granola. I get a lot of fruit-based stuff. I get those Siete chips. But yeah, I do use gels. Typically I'll do gels on the first day, to get my stomach used to everything. And then once my stomach's kind of settled in, that's when I'll start going to like more food type stuff.
Oh, interesting. I feel like I've almost heard, I mean, I'm not super keen on the ultra space yet, but I feel like I've almost heard the opposite, where some people will start with solid food first and then go to gels. Do you have like a reasoning behind starting with gels and then food?
I mean, your stomach's trying to do so much, like, especially if it's a hot race, like, you know, your body's trying to cool itself down, like your stomach's sloshing around from all the running and stuff like that. And so for me, I just found it's easier to do simple sugars like gels right at the start versus trying to eat something heavy or more dense, just to give my stomach the opportunity to like get used to running, get used to digesting those simple foods. And then usually for me, like 12 hours or so into a race is when I feel like my stomach's just like kind of adapted. And that's when I'll start having it. I'd be curious to know if those people who do that have stomach issues or not, because I know I would have stomach issues if I did it that way.
Yeah, I'd be curious as well. And I've only done a couple ultras. And I felt like I tried to start with solid food first, and it was kind of that same thing where my stomach just wasn't having it. So, that was kind of more of a selfish question, because I've got some ultras coming up. So I wanted to know.
Yeah.
So you did the 28-mile ultramarathon. That was about 6 years ago, I believe you said. So then,
No, that was 2013. So that was about 10 years ago.
10 years ago. Okay. So your first ultra 10 years ago. And I know you've done a heck of a lot more since then. So kind of take us on that journey from that first one throughout, you know, just where you went from there.
Yeah. So after that, I did a 50K about 2 or 3 months later. Then like a 50 miler and a 100K within that next year too. Like I jumped in pretty quick. My first 100-mile race was about a year and 3 months after my first ultra. And my first 100 was the Bear 100. So I did that in September of 2014. 4 months after that, I did the Zion 100. So I did 2 100-mile races pretty close to each other. And then about 5 or 6 months after that, I did the Wasatch 100. So
that was pretty gnarly.
Yeah, that one sucks. But yeah, within like the first, or I guess from when I did my first 100, a year after that, I did 2 more 100-mile races. So I got into the longer distance pretty quickly. Wasatch 100 would have been fall of 2015. And
what made you skip the whole road running scene and, you know, skip marathons, half marathons? I know you said you did 1 half in there, but what made you dive even deeper and further into the ultra scene?
Probably Cody Draper, the guy that got me into ultra running. I remember when he and I were first talking, and when we first met, I like told him how I would run up Logan Canyon Road. That was like my favorite place to go, just because it was quiet. You could see the mountains and stuff. And he was just like, you know, that like 50 feet to the right, there's a trail that you can run, right? And so his mentality is just like, if you can run on trails, why would you run on roads? And so I just like kind of adopted that mentality because he's the one that introduced me to it all. And that's kind of what I've stuck with ever since.
Have you done any kind of road racing since that like half marathon or that first 10K?
So I did Badwater last year, which is all road. Wow. I've done a track race. We run on a high school track for 24 hours. I've done Across the Years, which is a 24-hour race on this like 1 mile looped course, which is mostly concrete or it's like a sidewalk. But aside from those 3 things, it's all been like 100% trail.
Man.
And I definitely I definitely hate those 3 road races way more than the trail races that I do.
Yeah, there's something more, I don't know if primal is the word for it, but it just feels like you're more connected with the earth and yourself and the people around you, at least in my experience from trail running, and just being in nature. There's a lot to be said about that as well.
Yeah, I would agree with you. Like, and 2, like, so where I live, I can't run in the mountains in the winter. So I do a way more road running in the winter. And I don't know if you can relate to this since you do both, but like when I'm on the road, like I have the hardest time running slow. For me, I'm just like, I'm on the road, it's flat, I should be going fast. I don't want to look like a wimp in front of all the cars that are passing me. And so like, I feel like that mentality carries over to road races for me. It's way easier for me to pace myself at a trail race versus a road race, which maybe I should embrace and try to figure out how to pace myself at a road race, but I don't care to do that yet.
I think they're definitely two different sports, or at least very different genres within the sport of running, because you said it right there, of road running is way more about the times and your overall effort and, going fast. And I think that there's a lot more comparison and competition within road running as opposed to trail running. It's more just about like having fun, doing it for the experience, finishing the race. And really, in my experience, nobody really cares how long it takes you to finish it.
Yeah, exactly. It's just about kind of pushing yourself and seeing what you can do.
So you did the first couple 100-milers, and you mentioned off a few just incredible events in there that you did. I know there's a lot that you've done, and you have to list off every single one, but what are some of the more like notable ones, or maybe the most memorable ones that you've done in the last decade or so?
Yeah, so I learned about the 200-mile distance in 2016. I thought 100-mile was like kind of the cap. I didn't realize that there was way more above that. And so I learned about the 200-mile race scene. And so I ended up signing up for the Bigfoot 200 in 2017. Did the Bigfoot 200. I ended up getting like 6th place. But again, I feel like my time today would not have gotten me 6th place.
Just because the sport has grown so much.
Yeah. And so I got 6th place. I had a lot of stomach issues at that race just because I messed up my electrolytes. And so like I kind of swore off 200-mile races after that. But at the time, my coach moved up to where I lived just because I bragged about where I lived so much, but he's since left because he can't handle the winters. But anyway, so after that race, we met up for breakfast and I told him everything that went wrong. And he was just like, oh yeah, it sounds like you weren't right with your electrolytes. And so driving home from that breakfast, I was like, well, shoot, I wonder how I can do if I like dial in my electrolytes. And so I got home that day and told my wife I was going to sign up for the Tahoe 200, which was, 3 weeks later after that experience.
And so this was after the, what was the first two, or the 200 that you messed
up?
The
Bigfoot 200.
Bigfoot, okay.
Yeah, so Bigfoot 200, a week later, I signed up for the Tahoe 200, which at the time would be happening 3 weeks after I signed up for it. And since I signed up for the Tahoe 200, there's this thing called the Triple Crown of 200s, which is doing Bigfoot, Tahoe, and Moab 240. Moab 240 is in October, Tahoe 200s in September, Bigfoot 200s in August. So 3 200-mile races in the span of like 60 days. And so in my mind, I was just like, well, if I'm going to sign up for Tahoe and do 2 of the 3, I might as well sign up for Moab too. So that day I signed up for Moab too and put myself into the Triple Crown.
What year was this?
2017.
2017. Was there, those 200-mile races hadn't been around for that long, had they?
No, that year was actually the inaugural year of the Moab 240.
Wow.
I guess a detail I glossed over, I was planning on doing the Double Crown when I signed up for Bigfoot, but then she announced the Moab 240 just like right as I was getting ready to sign up for it. And so in my head, I was just like, oh, I could do 2, but I can't do 3. So that's why I only ended up signing up for Bigfoot. But then I ended up signing up for all 3 anyway that year.
Were you the first one to do all 3 of them?
I mean, technically, I guess, because I ended up, so there's this thing where like, for everybody that does the Triple Crown, Candace Burt, the race director, she's like created essentially a race called the Triple Crown of 200s. And it's just your 3 200-mile race times combined together. And so technically I ended up winning the Triple Crown that year. And so I guess theoretically, since I finished Moab first, I guess technically I was the first to finish all 3 that year. But yeah.
Dude, that's incredible, man. I keep hearing people say that 200 is the new 100. And I'm like, slow it down. Like I thought 100s were just becoming like a thing. And now it's 200s. It's incredible, man. Do you know Pierce Shao at all?
Yeah, I just started coaching him.
Oh, nice. I just had him on the podcast a couple of weeks ago because he's going for the Triple Crown, as I'm sure you know that.
Yep.
But just hearing, some of the training that goes into races like that, it's just nuts to me. What does your training look like for an event like a 200-mile race?
So, I mean, honestly, like my mileage doesn't increase that much from like training for a 100 to training to a 200. I'd say a couple of the biggest differences, I do a lot more back-to-back, like medium-ish runs followed up by a long run. So for me on like a Saturday, on a Friday, I'll go run about 15 miles up in the mountains, which is like, 2 to 3 hours. And then the next day I'll do like another 20 to 30 miles, which could be about 6 hours in the mountains. So I do like more of those back-to-back type stuff. But my total mileage probably stays the same. And I also try to, so basically like weekly mileage, I try to get around 80 to 90 a week, when I'm getting ready for a 200, but then I also try to get about 20,000 feet of climbing, which, 80 to 90 miles in the mountains is way more time on your feet than 80 to 90 miles on the road. So the volume is definitely there in terms of time. But the other thing I do too is just like, I'd say the biggest thing you need to get ready for a 200 versus a 100 is like the mental, like beating that you're going to get in a 200. And so occasionally, I haven't done this for a while since like, I think I've done 8 to 10 200s at this point. So I personally don't do this as much anymore, but like somebody like Pierce or somebody that's going to be new to the 200-mile scene, I will sprinkle in these like sleep deprivation training runs is what I call it. And so like in that scenario that I just gave you where I'll do 15 on Friday and 30 on Saturday, I will do like 2 times where I'll schedule like, Pierce, will use him as an example again, but I'll tell Pierce to go run 15 miles at like 10 p.m. at night on Friday. So he's going to finish between midnight and 1, and then he's going to get back, shower, get in bed, and then he's going to sleep for about 4 hours and then get up at 5 or 5:30 before the sun comes up and then go do his 30-mile run. And so that's just, I mean, honestly, the hardest part of a 200, one of the hardest parts, there's a lot of hard parts, but one of the hardest parts of a 200 is when you go down into that sleep tent or, pop-up camper, whatever you have, taking like an hour nap, hour and a half nap, and then waking up only to like realize you have to get back out in the cold, dark night and go on for another 100 miles or whatever it is. And so It's just like a lot more mental preparation, is really the biggest difference from what I've seen.
It kind of reminds me of the Goggins 4x4x48, or sort of a variation of that. I've done that a couple of times now, and that seems like a good introduction into kind of that, where you run for a little bit, you got to chill out and rest, and you got to run again. And it's like I'd rather just go run 50 miles and not have to deal with this run for over the course of 2 days. I'm sure 200-mile races are that, but just on a much grander scale, right?
Yeah, 100%. Like it's rough.
What do you think the hardest part? You said there's a lot of hard parts. Is there one specific thing that stands out that is so difficult about those races, or is it just a series of, or a combination of all these different little things?
I mean, so for me, like the hardest part is like kind of the loneliness. So for like the people who are in the front, like I would say like the people who are in the top 5 of these 200-mile races, maybe even the top 10, like they spend a lot of time alone. More middle of the pack people, like they can get like a good group of people. Like I know, Ryan, right?
Callan.
Yeah.
Yeah. However you say his last name. Yeah.
Yeah. So Ryan, like, I finished the Moab 240. What year was this? It would have been 2021. That was the year that Ryan did it too. And I finished, it was probably like 3 p.m. on a Sunday. I went to my hotel, showered up. I went to a restaurant, ate some dinner. And then like I hopped in the truck with my friend Ben Light, and we drove out on the course. I think I had about 5 or 6 people I was coaching doing Moab. And so I drove to like all the aid stations to try to see them. But like Ryan, he like came into one of the aid stations with a group of like 5 or 6 people. And so like more middle of the pack, like you definitely have more people to be around. So I don't know if this is necessarily a hard thing for people in the middle of the pack, but I know for me, being up in the front, it's really hard, like, cause you don't see anybody unless you have a pacer, like you're out there completely alone. And so like, I always tell people, if you are ungrateful for your life, go run a 200-mile race. Because like there's so many times I'll just be like sitting at mile 150. It's pitch dark at night. I'm cold. I'm tired. My body hurts. And I'm just like, I would give anything to just like hear my kids fighting with each other right now. Like obviously in the moment when they're fighting, I don't like it and it irritates me. But like when I'm deep in the pain cave like that, I would give anything to be in that moment and just be with my family. So for me, like the loneliness is kind of a really hard thing to deal with.
And I feel like that's something I don't hear a lot of ultra runners talk about is that loneliness aspect.
Maybe I'm soft. I don't know.
No, I think it's humility, I would say, to be able to talk about that. Cause everybody talks about the nutrition or the crewing and everything else involved, but that's one I just don't hear talked about a lot, which is interesting. When you get to those moments where you're like, man, I really don't want to keep going forward, do you have an answer that you tell yourself when you start asking yourself those why questions?
Yeah, I mean, the two things that I think of, you can't see it, but I remember I want to say it was the Tahoe 200. So it was my second 200 in 2017. I had terrible IT band issues from like mile 60 to 160. So almost 100 miles. I was just like walking in pain at that race. And when I was getting ready to quit, my wife took out like a Sharpie and just wrote on my arm, just one step forward. And so I ended up tattooing that on my arm right where she wrote it. And so like I look down at that tattoo a lot just to remind myself, like just one step forward. And, you know, I know that a lot of people have similar mantras. Like I paced Cam Hanes at a race once and he just kept saying to himself over and over, just one step closer. And so, you know, a lot of people have those kind of mantras, but just one step forward. And then my first DNF was the Zion 100K. And again, that was from IT band issues. But I remember where I dropped at Zion, it was mile 44. And the aid station I was at, the people put me in a truck, the aid station volunteers, and they drove me to the start line. And where they were driving me was actually the actual race course. And so I could see runners running down the road as I was driving by them. And I remember just like looking at them all and then just thinking like, what are you doing? Like you have 18 miles left. You can walk this if you really need to. And so I asked the volunteer if he could drive me back so I could finish. And he was just like, sorry, you're in a truck. Like you're officially done. And so I remember that like every time I want to drop, like I beat myself up for like 2 weeks after that, which probably is not healthy, but I was pretty torn that I quit when I realized that I didn't need to quit when it was too late. And so I just always remind myself like, yes, it sucks right now. Yes, I'm alone. Yes, I'm in pain, but the pain like that I'm feeling right now is going to be way less compared to like if I drop and beat myself up for the next week or whatever it ends up being.
Dude, that's a very powerful realization. When you can tell yourself in that moment that, okay, it's going to hurt now for the next X amount of hours, or it's going to hurt for months and months if I call it quits and throw in the towel right now. So it's a hard thing to have to tell yourself in that moment. But I think if you can, tell yourself that and understand it and accept it, I mean, there's not a lot of things you can quit when you have that mindset.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know if it's necessarily healthy to beat yourself up for a week or two after not finishing a race. That's probably something internal that I need to work on, but yeah, there's definitely a period of time after you DNF a race where you do feel some regret. And at least in my experience, that regret hurts way more than just like the temporary pain of being on your feet for too long.
I think there's a balanced amount of self-criticism and that like negative self-talk. And cause if you just told yourself, oh, it's fine if I quit, who cares? It doesn't matter. Like then you're just going to quit everything, but you have to have a balance of, I think it just makes you competitive too. It doesn't have to be competitive against somebody else, but competitive with yourself and knowing like, wow, I left something else out there and I just called it quits too early.
Yeah.
So I think there's definitely a healthy balance there. So to the average person who might say, like I was talking to a friend telling them that I was interviewing you and just saying some of the accomplishments that you've done. And they're like, why put your body through that? Why put your mind through that? Like why spend your time doing these these quote unquote crazy challenges. So to somebody, I would say the average person is probably going to be asking those questions. What would you say to that kind of question?
Yeah, probably two things. I've been realizing this a lot more lately, but I've been having like some mental health that I've been working on. And I believe that like a lot of runners, especially ultra runners, like have something, like whether it's an eating disorder they're trying to fight through or some kind of mental health issue that they're trying to run from. Like, I do think that like doing something like this is a way for you to put yourself into control. Where like you might have anxiety, you might have depression, and you might feel like you don't have control of your life. But by signing up for these things and doing these things, like you kind of are putting yourself in control. That's something I'm kind of realizing right now. But before this realization, the biggest thing for me that I've been telling people is like going back to when I broke my back. Like I was told I wouldn't be running for a year. I was told that running probably wouldn't be the same. I was told that I was almost paralyzed. So like, I just had this moment where I was just like, so where I broke my back, it was at a ski resort and I had like a 50-minute ambulance ride to the hospital. And just like that whole ride, I was just like, am I paralyzed? Am I going to be paralyzed? Like, what's this going to look like? So like that hour or whatever it ended up being was like pretty stressful for me in terms of what my future is going to look like. And so for me, like, being able to like run these distances, put my body in this kind of pain, like it goes back to that whole control thing that I was just talking about. But like for people that don't want to do these things, like I always just tell them like, wait until you're put into a situation where you can't do these things. And I'm pretty sure you're going to have a switch inside your head where you're going to wish that you did these things. I recently heard a podcast. Have you heard the David Goggins, Joe Rogan podcast that they just did in December?
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah. So David Goggins was in there talking. I think the term that he used was like he's front loaded his life, like talking about his knee surgery that he just had and how running is not the same for him right now. It's like Joe basically asked him if he was depressed or whatever, that running is different for him now. And he was just like, he's like, no, dude, I front loaded my life. Like I've done so many things that so many people are going to say that they've like never been able to do. I'm obviously going to find new things to push myself. Like if I need to swim or bike, then cool. But you know, if those get taken away from me eventually, like I front loaded my life, I've done all these epic things. I'm satisfied with that. And so I think that's pretty powerful. And, you know, that's something that I want to keep doing in case I ever get into a situation where I can't do this stuff anymore.
Yeah. It's just, you know, hopefully getting to the end of your life without regret and being able to truthfully tell yourself, like, did I do all the things that I wanted to do, all the things that I told myself I was going to do? And, you know, being able to not have to ask yourself, what if I would have done this? Or what if I would have went out and ran that marathon or that ultra marathon? And so I think that was a perfect answer to that question, man.
Thanks.
What other events do you have coming up this year? I know you've got some big things planned for 2023 and beyond.
Yeah, so I have the Cocodona 250 on May 1st. So coming up on about 2 weeks or 3 weeks from yesterday, I guess.
Is that going to be the longest single race you've done, like single distance, all in one shot?
No. Were we communicating back when I tried the Arizona Trail?
I think I chatted with you a little bit afterwards.
Okay. So I've done the Colorado Trail, which is just shy of 500 miles. And then last fall, I tried going after a fastest known time on the Arizona Trail, which is 800 miles. I didn't finish it. But I did it was about 615 miles is how far I got. And so that's the furthest I've ever done.
What does the Arizona Trail look like? Is it mostly single track, like through the mountains? It runs north and south to Arizona, right?
Yeah, so I started at the border of Utah and Arizona. You run about 80 miles on single track, fire road, and then you do the Grand Canyon. You go from the north rim to the south rim. And then once you get to that, you go on some more fire road all the way to Flagstaff. And then you basically run on single track and fire road all the way down to like Phoenix, Mesa, Scottsdale, eventually getting to Tucson, and then all the way to the border of Mexico. But it's a combination of single track, fire road, and a little bit of pavement.
Holy shit, dude. Just the fact that the Grand Canyon's a tiny little smidge of that. I did I hiked rim to rim to rim this last year,
Oh, nice.
and it was humbling. I wasn't like in trail mode or that ultra running mode or anything. And we just hiked it too. But I mean, just the fact that that's like a fraction of the Arizona Trail is hilarious to me. But
That was actually my first time doing the Grand Canyon.
that's an epic trail.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
I remember
beautiful.
like going up South Rim, and like, I have a watch where it like shows like the elevation profile of the route that you export onto your watch. And I remember going up South Rim, like it felt like an hour or so. And I was just like, man, I got to be getting close. And then I like went through my watch to see where I was at in relation to the climb. And like, I wasn't even near half. Like it blew my mind how much climbing there was to get out of that canyon.
Did you guys do, you said you went up the South Rim, or did you do Bright Angel?
I went down north, and then I think it was the
There's
South
two
Rim.
ways. Okay.
So
I didn't know.
I dropped down, I followed the river, and I got to a Phantom Ranch. Then I crossed the bridge and then just went straight up that trail the other side.
Okay.
I think that's just...
there's technically two that go up the South Rim. Regardless, I was just curious. We did the Bright Angel one, but both of them are just insanely steep. And it's the same thing. Like when we were coming back up, we're like, how are we not close to the top yet? Because it's just, I mean, it's just so damn steep. I mean, it's basically a mile from the river all the way up to the top. Man, so what happened during the Arizona Trail FKT attempt? Like as far as what made you drop out?
So about 3 weeks before, I had a pretty significant ankle sprain. Like it was bad, but I did like a lot of treatments. I did ozone therapy. I don't know if you've ever done that before or not. Basically though, it's where they it's painful, but they inject ozone gas at the site of your injury, and it basically increases ATP production, which will speed up your healing. And so
they do it under your skin, or?
Yeah, they take a big needle and just inject you with it.
Wow.
So they injected me right in my ankle, and I did that probably 4 or 5 times. So I did like ozone therapy. I took like a lot of anti-inflammatory supplements. I did a carnivore diet just to like really reduce the inflammation. And so I did get to a point where like it looked good, it felt good, but I do think I was doing a lot of compensating because I just started getting issues that I've never had before. Like I had shin splints, which I never get. My hamstring started cramping, my Achilles started hurting, my calves started hurting. So I just think I was doing a lot of compensating. That slowed me down a little bit, but also that trail, like I don't want to sound ungrateful, but that trail is the worst trail I've ever been on. Like I'll need to send you some videos that I took, but like there's times I couldn't even see a trail. It was just like weeds. I had to like pull my map out and just legit just like watch myself on the line to make sure I was on the trail. So there's a ton of overgrowth, a ton of route finding. Basically, I got to mile 600 and I had 75 hours to get the FKT for those final 200 miles, which I mean, I thought was doable just because all of my 200-mile races, like recently I've been doing between 50 and 55 hours. But like in my head at that time, how slow I was going, how much pain my shins were in, and just with how overgrown the trail was, I knew it wasn't realistic. And I didn't want to just finish it just to finish. Like I knew that if I finished, I wouldn't come back. And I know I can get the FKT. So I ended up dropping as kind of like a carrot to help me come back to it and then actually try to go after the FKT again.
Do you plan on going after it anytime soon?
I mean, I was originally planning on being out there right now, but the snow, like this, like, I don't know if you've seen pictures of the Grand Canyon right now, but like, there's no way I could do it right now with how much snow there is in the northern section. And so I'm looking at maybe doing it this fall, but fall is when I did it last time. And that's when it's overgrown and I don't really care to deal with that again. So it might be a year from now at the latest, but potentially this fall.
That's challenging, man. Do people go from south to north, like in hopes of all the snow would be melted? If you do it in the spring, I guess, or do you kind of have to go north to south?
So if you do the spring, you typically need to do north to south because it's 90 degrees in Tucson right now.
Oh, that makes sense.
Sorry, wait, I said that backwards. what am I trying to say?
Okay, you'd probably want the hot part to be towards the end, right?
No, you want that to be the start, actually.
Oh, okay.
So typically you do south to north in the spring, and then north to south in the fall, just because. So when I did this, actually me and my buddy Ben Light, we did this thing where we tried racing each other for the FKT. And so I started on the north end, he started on the south end, and then we raced each other. Neither of us made it. But
did you guys pass each other at some point?
No, basically he made it 200 miles and I made it 600. So we basically dropped at the same point.
Oh, dang.
Yeah.
Man.
But anyway, yeah. So like I'm sure one of the reasons he dropped is like 2 or 3 days after I got past the Grand Canyon, they got a pretty big snowstorm. And so that's why you want to start on the north end in the fall, because the chances of snow coming down increase, as the year progresses. So yeah, typically it's north to south in the fall and south to north in the spring. So you can get away from the heat before it gets too hot in the spring.
So went on a crazy side tangent there about Cocodona. But Cocodona is in 3 weeks from now, you said?
So Cocodona is in 3 weeks. I'm on the wait list for Western states. I don't know how realistic it is I'm going to get in. So if I don't get in, it's a new 100 called the Crazy Mountain 100. That's actually the one I paced Cam Hanes at last year.
Where's that one at?
Montana.
Okay.
And then in September, I'm doing a new 200 up in the Canadian Rockies. And then I'm either going to go after the Arizona Trail FKT or do some other different FKT. But I do want to do some kind of FKT attempt this fall.
Man, that's a slam pack 2023 for you.
Yeah.
What's the 200 in Colorado?
In Canada?
Or sorry, I meant Canada, not Colorado. Sorry.
That's okay. The one
you
I'm
said
doing
Rockies, and I was thinking of Colorado.
Yeah, it's oh crap, what's it called? The Divide 200. So this is the inaugural year for that one, and it's September, and yeah, it's just like up in Alberta in the Canadian Rockies.
Nice, man. That one I'm sure will be very. What do you ultra runners call it? It's got a lot of teeth on looking at the elevation map where it's just like jagged.
The vert, a lot of vert.
The vert, yeah.
Yeah.
See, I'm not into the ultra space, obviously.
there's a lot of vert.
Nice, man. Which one are you looking to a particular race? Out of all those, is there one you're looking forward to the most?
I would say Cocodona in that Canadian 200. Cocodona, I have kind of a weird history with that one. 2 years ago was the inaugural year, and I went out and did it, and I ended up it was my second DNF. I had to drop and go to the hospital. Do you know what rhabdomyolysis is?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I started peeing blood. And so I ended up dropping at mile 150, went to the hospital, and I had rhabdomyolysis, which is basically too much muscle breakdown leaking into your bloodstream, and then your kidneys have a hard time filtering it. It's basically premature kidney failure.
Is there anything you can do to prevent that?
Stay hydrated.
Because it's essentially, from my understanding, it's an imbalance of your fluids and your electrolytes, right?
Yeah. I made the stupid mistake. There's like this 23-mile section at the start. It's mile 10 to mile 33 or something. It's super steep. Like you're gaining almost 8,000 feet from what I can remember. And it's super hot, super exposed, and it's 23 miles. There's no water. So you have to carry all that water. And I did not carry enough water. And so I got to the point where I was just like desperate, and I was like seriously concerned that I was going to die. And so I ended up like just out of desperateness. Was that the right word? Desperation. Thank you. Just out of desperation, like I started opening my electrolyte packets and just dumping that in my mouth. Cause in my head, I was just like, I can't get water, but hopefully like I can get my electrolytes, which obviously isn't right. And so, yeah, it's an imbalance of your water, an imbalance of your electrolytes, just getting severely dehydrated basically. So yeah, just stay hydrated. Like
shit. Dude, that's the crazy part about that is like, you'd already done several 200s at that point, right? You'd already done several 100-mile races, and that just shows how many variables and how many things can go wrong in these really long distance races.
Well, so the biggest thing I learned from that, like I live in Utah. I remember the week before that race, it started snowing here. And so like I basically got there 2 days before the race, and we went from like snowing weather to high 90s. And so that was a huge shock for my body. So that taught me. Last year I went back, I went 2.5 weeks early. I got an Airbnb and I just like focused on heat training. And last year went really well aside from some issues, but like they had to reroute the course because there was a fire. And so I wasn't able to do that section that beat me up, that 23-mile section. And so I'm going back this year because like I got to finish the actual course. So I am excited to get out there and finish the actual course. But then that Canadian Rockies one, you know, it's a new race. It's a new area. There's a prize purse for the first top 3 finishers. So that one's going to be exciting too.
Dang. So that's the other thing with these races. You're not necessarily just going out to finish. I mean, I know that's part of it, but you're like top of the pack winning a lot of these races, right?
I'm trying to. Yeah.
Have you, when you did Cocodona last year, where did you come in for that one?
I got second.
Second. Who beat you out on that one?
His name is Joe McConaughey. His nickname's Streambean. Technically,
I know him. Okay.
Technically he's beat me twice because his FKT on the Arizona Trail is what I was going after last fall.
Oh man, a little bit of rivalry there.
Not really, but
friendly competition.
Yeah.
Man, but how about this year for Cocodona? Is there like a course record, I guess, that you're trying to beat, or just win the race, or what's your goal for that one?
Yeah, so technically there's 2 course records because last year was a reroute. So the last year's course was easier. There was less climbing. You didn't have that really hard section that beat up a lot of us. So there technically are 2 course records. I'm just going to go after the course record of the original course, which the winner of the inaugural year, he's actually doing it again this year. And I remember like right where I dropped the first year, he was basically right there. We were just right next to each other. So he'll be there. That'll be fun to compete with him. But yeah, the course record for the current course is 72 hours. The course record for the reroute course is 59 hours. It would be cool to beat that, but I'm just shooting for the actual course record on this original course.
Jeez. When you're thinking about when you're setting a goal for each race, are you looking at, you know, what time you think is going to challenge you the most, or are you looking at past times or course records or some of your competition, or how do you kind of go about that?
I mean, at this point, I'm looking at the course records. That's kind of what I want to go after. I haven't always done that. Like, I mean, in all honesty, I used to just compete just to push myself. But then in 2019, so the first year I did the Triple Crown of 200s in 2017, I did it in like 205 hours was the total time between all 3. And I felt like I left a lot on the table. Like the T-band issues, the stomach issues. I got a stress fracture at the Moab 240, which slowed me down a lot. So I felt, even though I won the Triple Crown that year, I felt like I could do way better. So in 2019, I went back just with the intent of just beating my time. Like I wanted to beat it by 10 hours. So I was hoping to get under 200 hours. And that was legit like my only goal. But this might sound like a funny statement, but like I ended up somehow winning all 3 of the races that year. And
so you won all 3 of the 200s, and obviously you have the Triple Crown too.
Yeah. And I ended up setting some kind of course record at each of the races that year too. And so I ended up shaving, it was over 40 hours off of my time. I went from like 205 hours to 160 something hours.
Holy shit.
So
that's incredible.
Thank you. But that was kind of like the experience where I was just like I had a paradigm shift basically. Like up to those 3 races, I was just racing to compete against myself. And then after those 3 races, I was like, okay, like maybe I can be good at this. Like maybe I actually can compete at these races. So that was about the time when I started actually like trying to race to get on the podium and set records.
Dude,
after that.
That's incredible, man. I mean, again, I think for the average person, and for you at one point, it was just like go out and finish. And so to now be racing these and going for the wins, just a whole nother level of eliteness, if that's a word.
I mean, I think it's like the thing I always try to tell people, like, you know, if I can do it, anybody can do it. Like, growing up overweight, breaking my back, racing just a race, and like not even intending to win all 3 of those races that year in 2019. Like seriously, I'd never imagined myself as somebody that could compete at these kind of races. So, I try to let people know that like, if that can happen for me, it can honestly happen for anybody that wants it to happen.
What do you think makes you different? I mean, I know you say that anybody can do it, but like obviously you have something that a lot of people don't, and not that it's a physical thing, but maybe some kind of mental thing that you've unlocked, or like what do you think sets you apart from a lot of these other runners or just humans in general?
I mean, I think like I have kind of a messed up past with my trauma that I've mentioned a couple of times. So like I've had a lot of bad things happen to me. We've covered a few of those today, like with the back and being overweight and stuff. But like, I've had the opportunity, you could say, to suffer a lot throughout my life. So, I mean, I'm not perfect at it. Like, I still get upset when I have to suffer, but I do feel like I have a higher threshold for like the ability to suffer. The biggest thing though, like if me and you were to race each other at Boston, you'd destroy me. Like I'm not a fast runner. I feel like I'm really good at just like going at a very okay, consistent pace for a long period of time. I'm good at operating on little sleep, which, a lot of these 200-mile races, the front runners who, just to give you an example, when I did the year that I won Bigfoot in 2019 for the first time and set a new course record, I was probably like in 5th place for most of that race. Everybody just kind of took off, and then those 5 people ended up blowing up. I remember I passed the guy who was in first at mile 150, and he looked wrecked, and I ended up beating him by almost 4 or 5 hours. And so
Jeez.
It's not common for like, this Cocodona 250 race in 3 weeks, they live stream it. I don't know how exciting it is because it's 5 days of live streaming a 200-mile race, but like, it's not going to be uncommon for those who are watching the live stream. Like it's very common for them to see me like, in 10th place or something like that for the first day or day and a half. I just let people go do their things, and I just let my consistent, slow turn and burn pace or whatever you want to call it, get me to the finish line. So just consistent, and then good at operating on little sleep, which is kind of huge for 200-mile races.
It's like the tortoise and the hare. It's like,
yep.
I think with any kind of, endurance event, it's the people that go out and burn themselves out too quickly. They're all excited. They're the ones that usually end up back of the pack, because it's just that consistent, relentless forward progress. It sounds like you've really you've nailed down, you figured it out basically.
I don't like talking about myself. I do feel like I've figured some stuff out.
Well, dude, so where do you see all of this going? Like, you've got some big plans this year, I know. Do you have like a 5-10 year, like a long-term goal for Mike McKnight?
Yeah, the big goal I'm getting ready for, I don't know when I'm going to do it. I'm hoping within 5 years, but I want to go after the Appalachian Trail FKT, and which is just barely over 40 days at this point, I think. But it's 2,100 miles. It's a very, very, very long journey. So that's kind of what everything's building up to right now.
When do you expect to take that on?
Well, so I want to finish the Arizona Trail first. I want to be able to do 800 miles. I want to find another FKT to go after, which is like 1,000 to 1,300 miles. So kind of like the half the distance of the Appalachian Trail. And then I want to do the Appalachian Trail. So, if I can do the Arizona Trail next year, maybe take a year off from something like that, and then do like a 1,200 mile FKT in 2026. And then go after the Appalachian Trail in 2027 or 2028.
Dude, that's going to be exciting, man. I feel like you're literally pushing the limits of, you are pushing the limits of human possibilities and what we currently think is possible. I mean, we haven't even talked about like your 0-calorie 100-miler. There's just all these course records, and there's just so much that you've done. It's so incredible. And you're just continuing to push the limits of what is humanly possible.
Well, I think there's a lesson to learn there, because like I feel like most of the stuff I've done and succeeded at are things that I necessarily didn't care to like win. And like, I mean, to be honest with you, I feel like ever since 2019, when I won those 3 races, it did well at helping me with my confidence, but I do feel like it's hit or miss on how well I do at a 200 now. And a lot of me wonders if that's because I'm like racing to compete versus just like racing to better myself. So I do think that there's something to that where, you know, if you get too caught up in just trying to beat other people, that you open up the window for a lot of things to go wrong versus just like kind of taking care of yourself, running by feel, eating food at aid stations, taking a nap at aid station, just like literally taking care of yourself and racing to better yourself. Like, I do think that there is more power in what you can do if you do it that way versus just like racing to be a winner.
Yeah, that's a good mindset to have for somebody even like myself who was wanting to get into 100-mile races, 200-mile races, these really long distance endurance events. Where would you recommend they start?
Depends where they're currently at.
I mean, let's say it's somebody who, you know, just like a typical recreational runner who's maybe done a couple half marathons, maybe a marathon, not done like anything too crazy long, but they want to eventually work up to a 100-mile race or longer.
Yeah, I would, 2 things. So develop consistency. So like the people that I coach, like I make sure that they know, like I believe in the 80-20 rule, where if you're doing 80% of the plan, then 20% is okay if you need some kind of deviation. And so I try to like tell people, you know, even if, so like say we'll bring Pierce back up. Say I have him scheduled to do like 6 miles today and just like life got in the way and he can't do 6 miles. I try to let people I coach know like, hey, if you can't do that, at least get out and try to do like 20 to 30 minutes. For one, chances are you're going to end up doing those 6 miles because like getting out the door is the hardest part. But second of all, just like 20 to 30 minutes, in my opinion, is enough to like keep the base like at least where it was. And so be consistent, even if it's just like 20 to 30 minutes a day, even if it's cross training. Like if you don't have time to run, if your knee hurts, if you have IT band pain, go hop on the bike instead. Like you don't have to just sit on the couch. So be consistent. And then kind of like my back experience, you know, I didn't go out and just run. Like I worked up to it. And so like figure out what's best for you and like work up to that distance. So, you know, for most people, that means like slowly breaking the glass ceiling. Like if 50K seems too challenging, sign up for a 50K, break that glass ceiling, then start focusing on a 50 miler. Because if 50K is too intimidating, then chances are you're not going to finish a 50 miler. So just like figure out what those glass ceilings are for you and just break those and then just work up to the 200-mile distance. And along the way, just be consistent.
That's beautiful, man. Yeah, that consistency is one of the most important things. And I love what you mentioned there about it's better to go tell yourself, okay, I'll just go do 20 to 30 minutes if I don't have time for a full 6 miles or whatever it might be. And I tell a lot of the athletes that I coach the same thing. I'm like, if you don't have time to go do it, just go out and do 5-10 minutes. Because usually, like you said, as long as you get out the door and you've got your running shoes on, and you're more than likely just going to start. You're just going to do the whole workout anyways because you're already there to do it. So yeah, that consistency is very powerful. But man, I'm super, super excited to see all this stuff you've got coming up this year and eventually taking on the Appalachian Trail FKT. If anybody can do that and set that FKT, I think it's you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I hope so.
Yeah, man. I know I love how you're just such a humble guy. It's just like any other ultra runner. It's like you guys are doing these insane things. You got to talk about it more.
I try to talk about it. I was going to tell you too, you're friends with Matt Choi, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was just talking to him a couple of weeks ago, but I don't know how serious he was about it, but he said he wants to come up here and like run in the mountains that I train in. So, you know, it'd be fun if you want to join him and get up here and I can show you around.
Dude, I would love to, man. If you're ever down here in Austin, we don't have any mountains down here, but we can run fast on the road. We could, I don't know, we can do some track workouts or something with you.
All right, that'd be cool.
Yeah, man. Where's a good place for people to find you? I know you've got a podcast, website, all that stuff. Where's the best place for people to find you at?
Yeah, so Instagram is where I do a lot of my communication. It's just at the low-carb runner. And then my website is... I should know my own website. I don't think there's the in front. I think it's just low-carb-runner.com. So low-carb-runner.com.
I'll put it in the description so people can click on it.
Yeah, those are the two biggest places that people can reach out to me. And I have no issues giving out my email. It's the lowcarbrunner@gmail.com.
That's beautiful, man. Well, dude, I really enjoyed this. There's so many other things I actually want to talk about, but we'll save it for another podcast. Just because you're such an interesting guy, and like you're just doing some incredible things. And I don't know, I could sit here and ask you questions all day, but I know you're a busy guy. You probably got steak to eat and miles to run and mountains to climb. So I'll let you go. But
thank you,
dude. This was a ton of fun, man. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for tuning into the show. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a review, and share it with a friend. We'll see you in the next one.